Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 12th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. No matter what part of Alaska you're in, you can find information about your village and community on weather.gov/Alaska or call the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391. During the day, you'll find information on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. And if you search for the hashtag AKwx, share your pictures that way or send us weather information that way. We'd love to hear it, whether it's on Facebook or on Twitter. That's a great way to communicate with your National Weather Service in the middle of the day. You know it was windy in southwest Alaska, but how windy was it? It's old Johnny Carson routine, but I don't have anything else after that, except for 93 miles an hour in Akun. Around Akatan there, the airport measured the strongest gust of the entire event that we know of anyway, at 93 miles per hour. Just down the road and across the water in Unalaska, up on one of the hilltops, Unalaska measured 92 miles per hour. It's about 79 miles per hour at the actual airport itself. King Cove, 76, Falls Pass, 72. Cold Bay, Nelson Lagoon in the 60-mile-an-hour range. Chignik, not too far behind at 61. And Sandpoint, 47. No doubt there were stronger gusts out there, probably over the water in places where we didn't actually have a weather sensor. But you get the drift. It was a pretty blustery day across southwest Alaska yesterday, and now that weather has moved into southeast, although it looks like a lot of those gusts have not been right next to the ground, so we're not measuring those gusts in the 60, 70, and 80 mile an hour range. It's a little bit lower than that. Most areas have been seeing gusts in the 30 and 40 mile an hour range, though I'm sure it has been a blustery day across southeast. A winter storm warning continues for the Klondike Highway right now. It has been snowing. They've seen at least 3 to 6, maybe even more inches of snow, and maybe upwards of 9 inches in some cases there. Again, pretty high terrain stuff there, but certainly slowing down travel along the highway. The winter storm warning continues until 9 o'clock, where between when we got an update around late this afternoon until that period, we could see another addition of about 7 to 9 inches. So there's still time for some more snow through the evening hours. Here's what we have from our friends in southeast Alaska from the Juneau National Weather Service office today. So far in their area in the eastern Gulf, they've seen 30-foot waves. Cape Suckling had 54-knot gusts there as of early this morning, and Cape Edgecombe around 52-knot gusts there. Again, that was around 3 o'clock this morning. Haines reported 14 inches of snow just before lunchtime. Skagway Customs around 9 inches, and White Pass had about 7. There have been some strong gusts in the region. Most areas, again, through the day have been reporting about 30 to 40 mile an hour range. Here are some of the stronger ones, though, around Cape Decision, 67 knots. You can see Heidelberg around 64 miles per hour. Annette, Ketchikan, and Juneau all showing gusts in the 40 and 50 mile an hour range there, with Juneau pretty blustery at 46. And Metlakatla even had some pea-sized hail. Now, when we talk about measuring hail, we usually don't talk about that in Alaska, but if you ever have hail, now's a great time for the reminder. Get out a coin if you've got a coin in your pocket, whether that's a dime or a quarter, and I don't have any because I don't keep coins in my pocket. But if you have one, it's a great way to tell us how big that hailstone is. Pea size is a great reference there. If it's a quarter or larger, that's severe size hail, the kind of hail they get in the Midwest and the East Coast, and the kind that can start to do some damage to your property. Pretty unusual stuff for Alaska. So if you get something larger than a quarter, make sure you let us know. Here's the way it looks on the satellite picture. And see all those kind of mackerel shaped clouds out across the west? That scaly kind of look to the satellite picture tells us one thing. There is some seriously cold air moving back across Alaska. and it's wintertime. All this is flowing into that very large storm sitting across the Gulf of Alaska, still hovering around 960 millibars. That is pulling in Pacific moisture. You can see some convection, some upward moving air that's developing into showers and thunderstorms out across the Pacific. So this wave will be interesting when it gets a little bit closer to home, but for right now, we're dealing with the western draw of that colder air. And here is that vacuum right there moving into north and eastern sections of the Gulf. On the south and eastern side, all these larger blossomings of clouds are showers and thunderstorms producing pea-sized hail on Metlakatla today, and numerous areas of lightning activity across the coastal parts of southeast, most of that along the outer coast. Now we still see some spotty areas of snow across the interior and the west today as that circulation continues to hover across the northern parts of the Gulf. We will continue to see spotty areas of snow across the interior, but those areas will become fewer and further in between as we get into the remainder of the week and into your weekend. Meanwhile, cold is just dropping southward. You can still see that northwesterly flow showing up on the satellite picture. Winds have been diminishing all day across the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, but still breezy out there, especially across the Gulf of Alaska. So here's our weather map. The front was moving through southeast earlier today. We've got kind of a in-between frontal boundary sitting across the higher terrain, blocking the coldest cold from moving in. And there's even colder cold moving across the Brooks Range there. That's that next weather front there painted in blue. That is a cold front. The triangles point the direction of travel. That would be southward as that heads slowly over the Brooks Range and into the interior tonight. We might see a few more clouds and some showers of snow across the western Brooks. High pressure sitting across the Chukchi Seacoast at 1,002 millibars, feeding that cold into the vacuum that is in the northeastern Gulf at 969 millibars. Wide areas of rain, thunderstorms and showers across parts of southeast. Again, most of those storms will be along coastal areas and offshore. Snow showers continue across the Copper River Basin. Drier airs moving into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys as well as Cook Inlet, and snow showers are still possible around Kodiak Inlet. Hit and miss snow showers across the Bering and the western coast, and we'll still have breezy conditions for the eastern chain as well as the Alaska Peninsula through tonight. Conditions will continue to improve across southeast, but slowly. That low doesn't move very much for tomorrow at 980 millibars. You'll see rain showers across a large part of southeast. Some snow continues at higher terrain, especially southern Yukon and up and down the Alcan border. Watch for a little more of that ice fog in areas of snow and flurries mainly. Look for snow showers across the Alaska Range, and you'll see a few snow showers across the western capes with rain and snow for the central and western chain. Here comes low pressure organizing once again across the central Bering, with high pressure strengthening up across the northern parts of the Beaufort and Chukchi Seacoast. That should lock in some more ice fog. Many areas saw that again today. And underneath that ridge, very stable air and very slow moving winds, if any at all, across the region. Across the Bering, low pressure is just kind of dawdling out here again. It's blocked by high pressure, and we already have a storm across the northern Gulf, so why would we add two? This guy hangs out in the west and starts to blow in another weather front to the southern chain and the west coast. That will pick up the southerly winds for the west coast there, so conditions may warm just a little bit more. And most of the active precipitation will stay out around St. Matthew and the Pribilofs and the chain with that west and northwesterly flow as low pressure continues to sit and spin across the north and eastern parts of the Gulf. Most areas in south central and the interior look to be fairly dry for Saturday, but it will not be warm. Here's a look at the temperatures. 30s and 40s for most of southeast, 40 in Juneau, 44 in Sitka. Metlakatla had temperatures in the lower 40s with that thunderstorm that passed through today. 36 in Yakutat, about 37 in Cordova with rain falling there, and snow was falling in and around Valdez. 26 as we saw in Anchorage today, 33 in Homer up the road in the Matanuska Glacier region. It was 9 degrees, 17 around Golcanna, and 27 in Talkeetna. Fairbanks was pretty cool today, 5 below, but Eagle had you beat at 9 below. It was not that cold in Fort Yukon, only 7 today. 7 above in Anaktuvuk Pass, and 6 below are around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, where areas of ice fog were seen. 1 below in Barrow, 6 below in Atkasuk, and teens registered up and down the Chukchi Seacoast around Kotzebue to Shishmaref, where it was about 25, 23 in Nome. And as you head down the coast toward Imanik, it was 28, 21 for our friends watching in Bethel tonight, 14 in McGrath and cooling down. And it looks like temperatures will hover in the upper 20s again tomorrow for parts of Bristol Bay. 31 degrees or so earlier today around St. Paul, down to 30 by 3 o'clock, and 33 in St. George. The Alaska Peninsula was hovering close to freezing. 38 around Kodiak, 32 in AKwx, and upper 30s for the central chain, as well as 39 out around Shemya. Overnight low temperatures are going to start to get pretty cold, and noticeably so for the central and eastern interior, anywhere from 5 to about 20 below for areas closer to Arctic Village, 8 below in Fort Yukon, 3 below in Barrow. Looks like Fairbanks will be closer to 13 below tonight. Low to mid-teens for South Central, including the Kenai Peninsula, upper 30s for Southeast, 28 in Kodiak, and only in the teens for Southwest with Nome at 12. And it looks like Kivalina closer to 4 below. The Alaska Peninsula and the chain will hover in the 30s with highs tomorrow back in the mid to upper 30s. Southwest still in the upper 20s. McGrath near 12, 21 in Nome, 3 for Barrow, and 2 in Fairbanks, with South Central holding in the teens and 20s. So again, a colder end of the week. 30s and 40s for Southeast, with Juneau in the capital city closer to about 40. Flying weather should show some improvements for Southeast, though there will still be some areas of turbulence and probably some gap winds. Look for visibility to hover in the MVFR range for most of the Panhandle. For the West Coast, look for MVFR all the way from the western tip of Tin City and the Bering Strait down to Bristol Bay and the Central Chain, with IFR conditions for Nunivak Island as well as Hamonic and northern areas of the Yukon Delta, with MVFR expected for a large part of the Beaufort Seacoast thanks to high pressure there. And AKwx Pass will start at MVFR, heading for VFR conditions there. Similar expectations for Adigan Pass tomorrow, ending up on the sunnier side of life. With Lake Clark and Merrill Pass looking for VFR conditions by the end of the day. It looks like Rainy Pass should also see some improvements during your Friday. Windy Pass, we expect MVFR to start things off. For Friday, Isabel Pass also looking marginal to start with VFR conditions to end. Mentasta Pass, probably IFR. Again, watch for some of that ice fog in the region with MVFR by the end of the day, so some improvements. Tanita Pass looks pretty good. Dry conditions for most of the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, and Portage Pass looking at VFR through most of the day. Chilcoots should see some improvements as the day goes on, but it will only end with marginal conditions throughout the day. The freezing levels show that warm air is still retreating south and east as colder air is drawing into our Alaska weather picture. Freezing levels only as high as 2,000 feet for most of southeastern Alaska, maybe a little bit higher the further south you go toward the Dixon entrance. The surface freezing line just north of the Pribilofs and hovering very close to Kodiak and the Alaska Peninsula. Icing potential keeps levels around 4,000 feet and above for most of southeast. There's still some moisture there, and that means occasional moderate is possible. In some extreme instances, most of that will be isolated, and the same goes for areas north and east of St. Paul up to St. Matthew, above about 3,000 feet. Most other areas are drying out and fast. The jet stream has a pretty fast-moving superhighway of weather pointed at us, but it is slowing down a little bit from the last couple days, still holding around 150 knots across the central and southern parts of southeast and the Gulf, with that flow aimed right at the southern parts of southeast. In this area, again, is probably some of the best lift of the storm system, and that's why we're seeing those showers and thunderstorms continuing to form along coastal areas. This next wave, the dip you see in the jet stream here, is kind of the next little push of energetic weather, and that should help to get some more clouds and weather going across the chain in the next day or so. At 9,000 feet, you can see one trough of low pressure across the Gulf supporting our current storm, and that other trough working into the Bering that will energize the next wave of weather developing across the central and northern Bering. Winds are still pretty light for most of the interior. Southeast, you're looking at winds anywhere from 35 to 50 knots from the south and southwest. And for most of the west coast, you're still under breezier conditions there at 9,000 feet, 35 to as high as 50 knots. Similar conditions at 3,000 feet, slower winds at this level for south and east. You can see our circulation in the northern Gulf, and winds across the west holding around 10 to about 35 knots or so for the southwestern capes. Still a little breezy and more of a westerly flow for the chain. Turbulence is focused mainly for the Gulf and the chain then at this point below 5,000 feet, with areas of occasional moderate for southeast, especially in the inner waterways. For southwest, Shelikof Strait and most of the lee side of the Alaska Peninsula, especially those northwesterly faces and gaps there below 4,000 feet. Watch for occasional moderate, and we'll see some isolated moderate across the central, eastern, and the western chain, generally below 4,000 feet there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a sea ice update you don't want to miss and the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Here come the Leonids.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
On Wednesday morning, November 18th, from midnight to dawn, we may get to see the annual Leonid meteor shower.
And like the Perseids back in August, the moon is going to help by staying out of the way. Let's show you. If you're far from city lights on any clear moonless night, you're likely to see a few meteors if you stay out long enough and keep looking up.
Meteors have long been called shooting stars because that's what they look like. But they're not really stars shooting across the sky. In fact, when you see a meteor, you're seeing a tiny speck of space debris, anywhere from the size of a grain of sand to pebble-sized, slam into our Earth's atmosphere at such high speeds that the particles impact with the molecules of air, and this causes gases in our Earth's atmosphere to glow, kind of like the way a fluorescent light does.
So, when you see a shooting star, you're actually seeing the gas atoms in our Earth's atmosphere glow all along the path that the space debris, the meteor, has traveled. So on any clear, dark, moonless night, you can see a handful of meteors if you have a lot of patience.
But about 12 times a year, we experience what we call a meteor shower. And every November, we have the Leonid meteor shower, so named because its meteors appear to radiate from the constellation Leo the Lion. Meteor showers are a bit different from the meteors you see every night because the meteors in a meteor shower are predictable and are made up of comet debris.
You see, every time a comet passes through our solar system, it sheds some of its debris along its orbit. And if the Earth intersects with the comet's path, we'll get a meteor shower. Meteor showers are somewhat predictable because the Earth returns to about the same spot in space at the same time each year.
And every November, we plow into some of the debris from the comet Tempel-Tuttle, a comet which visits the Sun every 33 years. And in the years just preceding or following Tempel-Tuttle's passage, we pass through a denser debris field, and we may experience meteor showers with greater than usual intensity, which we call meteor storms. The last storm from the Leonids was in 2002.
You never know when one of these storms may happen, but the best prediction this year for North America is to go out from 1 a.m. through dawn Wednesday the 18th.
That's the night of the 17th and morning of the 18th.
Leo is going to be even easier to find this year because the planets Venus, Mars, and Jupiter will make a nice trail of light pointing directly toward the head of Leo the Lion. Venus will be closest to the horizon, Mars will be above Venus, and Jupiter will be above Mars.
As the night goes on, the meteor radiant will rise higher and higher, and the bright star Regulus will be to the west of Jupiter. You may even see a few really bright meteors with long trails.
Or maybe not.
And one more thing, the Leonids are the fastest of all meteors because we're hitting them nearly head-on. They slam into our Earth's atmosphere traveling at speeds of over 158,000 miles per hour.
And for those of you who aren't going to stay up all night, we have the first quarter moon visible in the southwest just after sunset. The moon will be just below the star Deneb Algety, which marks the tail of Capricornus the sea goat. Capricornus is just to the east of the teapot in Sagittarius.
We don't mention Capricornus often, but legend has it that he was once Pan, the half-man, half-goat Greek god of nature. Typhon, the Titanic fire god, startled him one day, and in Pan's attempt to turn himself into a fish and escape, he panicked, and only his back half became a fish. His front half stayed a goat, making him a goatfish, or a fish goat.
So, get outside before dawn on Wednesday the 18th to watch the Leonid meteor shower. And look for Venus, Mars, and Jupiter to join the show. Happy meteor shower and keep looking up.
A lot of times people think, well, marine debris is the trash that I see when I go to the beach or maybe when I go and visit a local stream or waterway. But that's just the debris that you can see. Marine debris is submerged. It's floating around in our oceans.
Often, not only will you find the conglomerates that have multiple types of net in them, You also find pieces of plastic, parts of floats. You'll find a lot of laundry baskets.
Marine debris is any solid material that enters into the marine environment, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Marine debris is a global problem that affects all of our oceans across the entire planet. Floating marine debris is oftentimes mistaken for food by marine mammals and sea turtles. Whether it's a plastic bag that looks like a jellyfish or shiny pieces of plastic material that may resemble fish, these animals will go after this and eat it, and eventually it will cause them to starve. And this is because their stomachs will become full of plastic and they won't feel hungry and they won't find the need to eat. Derelict or ghost traps that are found under the water in areas such as the Chesapeake Bay or Puget Sound oftentimes will continue to fish for crabs and other animals. And the problem with this is that there's no one to collect them. So a net or a trap that is just rolling around under the water will continue to collect animals that will eventually die. Ghost nets present a very big problem to the habitat in the oceans, especially to coral reefs, as a net can smother or block out the necessary sunlight that they need. It also damages fragile habitats and the pieces of coral.
A lot of these nets that we find in the ocean are related to the fisheries industry, and it's not something that we can point a finger at and say, this is, your problem, you need to clean this up. We're all responsible for this problem based on the fact that we all like fish. So what we're trying to do, instead of pointing fingers, is take responsibility for the problems that we see. And it's not just one country's problem, it's all of our problem.
Marine debris is generated from various sources, from the large industrial and commercial end down to the specific individual behavior. When a person doesn't put their trash in the proper place or fails to recycle, a lot of times their trash ends up in a stream, in a waterway or storm drain, which is carried out to the rivers, which is carried out to the ocean. There are things that you can do to help the problem of marine debris. You can do the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, or recycle. It's very easy to do this, and it goes a long way towards preventing marine debris.
Now, if you're up on the Beaufort seacoast and you happen to run into a little bit of open water, don't be surprised. There is a very thin lead north of Dead Horse Prudhoe Bay and north of the Colville River Delta where the main ice pack is lifting to the north and west. And this will continue maybe for another day or so, short-lived. Not great for navigation, but might be okay for hunting there. So keep an eye out for that. And be careful if you're heading out that way. There is thinner than normal ice in that very thin blue lead that we've got painted on the map tonight. Here's the bigger picture. You can see that lead in respect to the rest of what's going on along the Chukchi seacoast. Ice will probably start to fill in a little bit more in some of those areas as the wind settles down there. It's been a little breezy for some areas, but again, that's a big factor in how fast that ice forms when that wind starts to slow down. So we're still seeing some new ice growing there along the Chukchi coast and in Norton Sound. Here's a look at southeast now, and you can see the inner waterways looking at winds about 20 to 30. Things have really settled down for tomorrow compared to where they were today. Look for stronger south and westerly flow across the outer coast with the risk of thunderstorms again. Some of those could be across the Clarence Strait as well, so keep watch for that. Westerlies coming into Cross Sound at 35 knots with 26-foot seas, and northeasterlies out of Yakutat and Icy Cape with 19-foot seas on a 20-knot flow. That strengthens a little bit more from the east as we get into Saturday. Northerlies coming out of Lynn Canal at 25 knots, southeasterlies across Clarence Strait, and an onshore flow from Gustavus all the way down toward Craig at 20 to 25 knots with 14 to 19-foot seas on Saturday. For South Central, northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, a little breezy at times, 5-foot seas there all the way from Anchorage down toward Kenai and south. Northwesterlies coming across the Barrens at 40 knots with 10 to 13-foot seas from west to east respectively. And northerlies inside of Prince William Sound. Higher gusts as you head out toward the Copper River Delta region, 9 to 12-foot seas in the north and western Gulf, 15-foot seas east of Kodiak with a 40-knot flow. That becomes westerly with time and diminishes to about 30, 15 to 20 knots in the north and western Gulf, and winds and seas diminish across the Cook Inlet region. The Barrens still a little blustery at 30 to 35 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula on Friday, look for higher gusts from Castle Cape to Chignik on a 40-knot wind, 17-foot seas there. Northwesterlies also in Bristol Bay up to 30 knots with a 9-foot sea. For Saturday, a light easterly flow moving through Bristol Bay, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Westerlies across the Pacific coast, 30 to 35 knots with a 10 to 12-foot sea on Saturday. For the Aleutians, winds are dying down to about 30 to 35 knots and should stay there for most of the weekend. 30 to 35 knots from Unalaska to Nikolsky, from Adak to Kiska. Look for 14-foot seas from Kiska to Attu, though, and for many areas across the Pacific, 10 to 11-foot seas. As we get into Saturday, the seas come up just a little bit more. 13-foot seas across the Pacific, 13 to 14-foot seas for the Bering, and 9-foot seas out in the west with that northwesterly flow at 25 knots for Saturday. For the West Coast, freezing spray is becoming more and more of an issue now as temperatures drop off and the water remains open. 25 to 30 knots north of Nunivak Island to St. Lawrence Island. Westerlies coming into St. Paul and St. George at 30 knots with an 11-foot sea, and northwesterlies across Kuskokwim Bay with a 10-foot sea on Friday. That reverses course to a southeasterly direction as we get into Saturday from St. Lawrence Island all the way down to Kuskokwim Bay, looking at 20 to 30 knots with 6 to 7-foot seas. We'll keep our westerly flow for St. Matthew and the Pribilofs at 30 knots with a 12-foot sea in both areas. And for Friday across the North Slope, 10 to 15 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast, again over the ice, 10 to 20 knots across the Chukchi Seacoast with 2 to 3-foot seas north of Point Hope. Outside of Kotzebue Sound, that's a 4-foot sea. Again, watch for freezing spray there. Winds will diminish across the Chukchi Sea as we get into Saturday, still holding around 10 to 15 knots, and 10 to 15 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast there, again from north and west directions. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Colder air is going to be the bigger story as we get into the weekend. Most of that will be taking over most of the continental part of Alaska, with southeast, though, still under unsettled weather as low pressure hovers in the north and eastern Gulf at 969 millibars. Showers and thunderstorms will continue across coastal parts of southeast tonight and into tomorrow, with periods of rain and snow showers continuing for the inner waterways. The coldest air remains to the north and west, and as that's drying out, watch for that to cover up the Susitna and Matanuska valleys and most of the Cook Inlet region, drying the sky as we go, with showers of rain and snow continuing over the Bering and high pressure dropping into the North Slope and helping to clear the sky as we head into Saturday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.